Hi, Ambassador Bolton. Pleasure to welcome you back to the show. Thanks for making the time.
Glad to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Since the last time we spoke, those threats on tariffs have remained. They've been imposed. They've been lifted for 30 days. Then some on steel and aluminum have actually come into effect. Should we anticipate as Canadians to be under the threat of the imposition of tariffs of some sort for the next 4 years?
Well, I think Canada and the rest of the world, this is what Trump has said repeatedly. He thinks the word tariff is the most beautiful word in the dictionary. A lot of people in the Republican Party during the campaign said, don't worry, it's just for bargaining purposes. And there's a certain element of that. But Trump's peddling a line of economic illiteracy, frankly, and it's going to leave all of us worse off unless somebody can find a way to convince him to pull back on this. It's going to cause a lot of economic damage all the way around. I think it's harming the United States worldwide by reducing the store of goodwill that we've built up. Maybe it wasn't that big to begin with, but Trump is burning through it at a very rapid rate.
Do you think that, I guess that despite the market losses right now, the prospect of a recession and even the fact that Trump didn't outright rule it out caused those market losses on the first day? Like, will any of that puncture through, do you think?
Well, I think he is trying to condition people to accept a period of bad economic news and try and blame it on somebody else. But he knows that that his time is limited because pretty soon people are going to be saying, well, where's the relief we expected from the high prices under the Biden administration? You know, Trump didn't win all that by that big a margin. He won, I think, primarily on the economic issues, and so far he hasn't delivered anything, and these tariffs aren't going to make it any better. So the pressure may come, and I just think in Canada and other countries, people should recognize Trump doesn't represent 99% of the American people. I don't even think he comes close to representing 50% on these issues. He's taking advantage of being a newly elected president, but everybody should remember he's also a lame duck president. And we have to think of the long term here and not just think that Trump represents something that can never be changed back. The difficulty is how to mitigate the damage in the meantime.
And what are the implications of what you just laid out for strategically how a country like Canada responds? Because there have been some differences in the way different countries have responded to either the threat of tariffs or their actual imposition. Canada has launched counter tariffs. We've had a blitz on U.S. media, for example, I think with an aim to reach those Americans, as you spell out, will voice their opposition to what's happening. Do you take the sort of strongman, fight back approach? Do you stay quiet for a while? Like, what do you think might be the most effective?
Well, I think the thing to keep in mind is that Trump is not pursuing a coherent economic agenda. He's not pursuing some grand strategy internationally. He's being Donald Trump. He goes day by day, and what he's really looking for is what benefits Donald Trump. So as your new prime minister thinks about how to respond, he should reflect on how Justin Trudeau did. Trump and Trudeau didn't get along, at least from Trump's perspective. That's where this business about Canada being the 51st state comes from, so he can talk about Trudeau as Governor Trudeau. He knows it's a put down. If he had any sense of awareness other than what makes Donald Trump happy, he would have seen that the way he treated Trudeau and the Canadian government has led to a collapse of support for the Conservative Party, like falling off a cliff, and support for the Liberal Party increasing to the point where the race is for the election you'll have later this year is too close to call. It's evidence, that very fact is evidence Trump only cares about himself. So what Carney has to do is think, how can I appeal to Trump, not to the United States, not to what's good for America, what's good for Donald Trump that will persuade him to let up on all this nonsense. And I don't have any suggestions at the moment. Flattery always works well with Trump, but he needs to think of something. He could recommend, for example, that he'd nominate Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize. That would be, Trump wants the Nobel Peace Prize. Maybe that's a good way to get in.
Do you think there is a window now with a change in the prime minister and potentially a change in government, depending on what happens in an election, which could be called as soon as next week, not even later this year? Do you think that reset, given what you recounted in your book, for example, the room where it happened, about the relationship between Trump and Trudeau, like, is that possibility there, or ultimately is Trump set on a path no matter what?
No, I think Trump sees international affairs as being personal. If he has good personal relations with Vladimir Putin, and the U.S. and Russia have good relations, it's possible he could have good relations with Carney. Carney has a business background. He's got to decide how he wants to do it on his own, obviously. But in Trump's view, he forms impressions of people in the first minute or less. And so you don't, as I say, there's no second act in politics. It's going to be one phone call to congratulate Carney on becoming prime minister. But it's worth a lot of thought how to handle that meeting, and maybe that personal dynamic would be enough to change things. That's the main recommendation I would make.
More broadly, I did want to ask you, Ambassador, about the G7, because again, part of that book and part of what you recounted in it is that now famous, the real story behind that now famous photo in Charlevoix. As we speak, the meeting of foreign ministers for the G7 is taking place in the same in Charlevoix as well. Your view on the structure of the G7, the limits to, I guess, what can come of it given the current relationship between the U.S. and the rest of the countries?
Well, I think the other foreign ministers should take the opportunity to tell Rubio that Trump is tearing up America's alliances, political and economic. I don't think Rubio agrees with what Trump is doing in almost all of these cases. He hasn't said anything publicly, of course, because it would be his death warrant as Secretary of State politically. If he did, he wouldn't last but a few minutes after the end of any press conference where he said anything. But people need to talk to Rubio about the damage Trump is doing, and find a way politely in a quiet conversation to say, Marco, think about the damage you're doing to your own reputation and history by allowing Trump or watching Trump do all these things. I think it's an intimate enough group that it might have an effect on Rubio, who has had, from my perspective, a great reputation on U.S. national security policy, and is one of the few voices inside the Trump administration that might speak up against certainly the economic madness of the tariffs and the destruction of NATO.
Do you think he would care if other foreign ministers made that point to him in the manner you describe?
Well, Canada was always good in various jobs I've had, is saying, we're your best friend. Now let me tell you what you're doing wrong. And sometimes it was irritating. I'll be honest about that. But it's important to try it, because otherwise Rubio will just get lost in Trump world bubble, and it'll turn out that talking to him is like talking to Trump. You want to talk to Rubio as the senator he was before he became Secretary of State.
Okay, Ambassador, I'll leave it on that note. Appreciate your insights as always. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.